Roll. Roll.
3, 2, 1, go!
Awesome.
Well, the producer tells me we're on air, so I'll begin with a collect from the Book of Common Prayer. I don't think we pray it certainly enough as Episcopalians or as American Episcopalians, but you've given me the gift of praying this collect many days over the summer. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. O God, in the course of this busy life, give us times of refreshment and peace, and grant that we may so use our leisure to rebuild our bodies and renew our minds, that our spirits may be open to the goodness of your creation, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. I realize how very blessed I am to have been afforded the time to have this summer away. And today, as I said last week, I've refrained from calling this how I spent my summer vacation, but essentially that's what it is. So, and I hope I don't wear you out with photographs, particularly at the end of this presentation. But I think this stepping back, having time to renew one's mind, body, and spirit, I hope is not just something that academics and clergy get to do. I hope you think about that in your own life. And think about Sabbath, the Sabbath moments in every day, keeping the Sabbath during a week, and finding Sabbath time in a year, and then maybe after multiple years, stepping back even further. And again, I realize how blessed I am, and I'm grateful to all of you for that. The three things that I learned that I'm sharing with you today, if we go to the next slide. Hopefully the left is familiar that we are a people who aspire to pray, worship, learn, serve, and give. It's one thing for me to say that as the rector of this parish, to encourage us as people to follow these 5 aspirational tenets. It's another thing to be not part of a community and separated. And what I'm finding and what I found over the summer is how important it is to keep those routines going. Not because it's my job, but because I'm a Christian disciple, because I follow Jesus. And I'll say a bit more about that. We lost the middle picture, which is something someone I hope that you recognize. His silhouette is on the wall back here. The original of that silhouette is at William and Mary in Williamsburg. That's William Holland Wilmer. And dear William Holland Wilmer, the second rector of St. Paul's, was my companion this summer. So I'll say more about William Holland Wilmer. And then that third picture was a map of Israel, Palestine and Israel. And so part of my learnings had to be a pilgrim and be with fellow pilgrims on the journey to the Holy Land. So the learnings in perhaps I should.
It's almost there. We're almost back.
Perhaps I should just stop and not try to talk over.
Just give me a second.
You can get TED Talk.
Yeah.
Let me review those 5 tenets, aspirational tenets. Pray, worship, learn, serve, and give. We are a people who have a daily conversation with God. And we do that through reading the scriptures and through daily prayer. We are people who keep the Sabbath. We worship, we gather, and keep the Sabbath. It's important not only to honor God, but also to find those times of rest, to engage with people we love, and know that that's so important that that's something we must do for our own health and vitality and our own spiritual life. We are people who never stop learning. The journey always continues. We have to be responsible for that ongoing learning and deepening of our faith. We are people who serve, and the aspiration is that each of us at St. Paul's would have a ministry inside the parish where we serve the church inside the parish, and a ministry in the world. It's not necessarily something that we wear a badge doing. It could be in our daily life, in our vocational life. We are God's representative in that work that we are doing, and it really shifts our mindsets. And then last, to be people who give, that we give of ourselves, knowing that when we give, we receive. When we give ourselves away, the more we have to give away. That's part of God's economy. All of this stuff is easy to say, it's hard to do. And at least if we're able, I'd love to show you what I did in terms of my own prayer life. I just reviewed those. I hope this works. Keep your fingers crossed,
Yeah.
folks.
This is right, yeah.
Oh, we did it.
We did it.
Okay, so you know me well enough to know I'm fairly old school. And so when we gather for morning prayer, and I've always been on a parish staff. I've never been on my own ever in 34 years. So I always had a community of people to pray with every day. And to be able to do morning prayer with us, and you come anytime at 9 o'clock in the chapel where we gather every day, it requires 3 books. You need a prayer book, you need our cycle of prayers, and you need the lectionary book. Well, for Day by Day makes it so easy. I hope if you haven't already, you sign up for this for Day by Day email that comes every day. And all you do is that you have one click and you have everything all in one place. I'm tempted now to bring my iPad to the chapel. It's just that much easier. So the point being in all of this is how there are lots of ways to do it. This is a very simple, very Anglican way to do it. Having the daily office and having a lectionary of scriptures that it's on a 2-year cycle. It's just very simple and easy. And one of the other things you do today, it's the 15th Sunday after Pentecost. Often on that daily email, there'll also be a line with a saint. Hildegard was yesterday. And when you see that there, all you have to do is click on Hildegard, and you go and you get a prayer for Hildegard and get a little bit of history about her, so you learn something about one of those who have gone before us to witness. So again, very easy, very simple to do. And it's about creating these holy, healthy habits. It's all about being intentional and keeping up. Knowing that we fall short, and did I do it every day? Most every day, not every day. But I found that I missed it when I didn't. So, I tend to do the morning office, but some people prefer evening. So instead of the first thing you do in the morning, the last thing you do of the day. It works. And of all these 5 tenets, this is what I won't say publicly, although it's being recorded and people will see this. If there's any one of them that is known to deepen and encourage faith, it's the first one. We don't do anything else. Do the first one. Okay, let's move on. Another thing about those tenets is sort of keeping the Sabbath, and it was been interesting for Barbara and for me to go to different parishes. And that's been really incredible. And I'm just going to tell you about 2 experiences, and they were the very last 2 experiences of the summer, so just 4 and 3 weeks ago. Because it's been interesting to travel around and sort of be a student of human behavior and how things happen in the church and how people are dealing with COVID at this point. It's fascinating. Okay, so 4 Sundays ago, we were at the National Cathedral, and 1,500 people there, marvelous liturgy. When it came time to distribute communion, they were distributing bread and wine. You could go and get your wafer, and you could only drink from the cup. Could not intinct. You could take the wafer and go back to your seat or drink. The very next Sunday, we were in another parish in Virginia. I won't tell you which one it was. And it was the complete other extreme. I'd never experienced this before. So when we got to, on the way to the communion rail, we were instructed to pick up a little plastic shot glass and be there at the rail, and the priest came by with an inverted kind of Pez machine. The wafers were all lined up, and it had a kind of mechanical action. And we got tickled because down the communion rail there were children, and they were insisting that the priest hit the shot cup with very funny. But it's been interesting in terms of watching virtual church and attending in person. I know during COVID we went to great lengths to talk about how, given the restraints and the constraints of what we were living with during the pandemic, how critical it was to try to stay connected, and that virtual church was the medium for doing that, and that God is fully present in that. We believe that to be true. Now, having said that, it's a very different experience from being shoulder to shoulder, eyeball to eyeball, engaging real live human beings in worship. And clearly that is the experience, that's the norm. But it's going to be curious about how we get back into those holy habits, how we for some folks, risk being back with the community and people again. And it's very hard. So when I think about re-entering, and I'm so grateful that Homecoming Sunday was such a great success. It was wonderful to see this room filled with people engaging one another. It's wonderful to have people back in church. And by the way, I'm taking my next sabbatical. The next time any construction is going on, I'll be gone for the whole thing. It's really terrific. It's amazing what's happened there and have people back in this beautifully restored space. But in terms of our mindset, I think all of us now have to be back in the mindset where we encourage one another. We invite people to join us in church. We welcome people when we see them here to make that experience so meaningful that they'll want to come back, that they'll be drawn back into the heart of community life. Because my sense is that once we experience it and get the taste of it, we know how critical and important it is for all the rest of our life. If we get this part straight, all the other things begin to fall into place. It brings meaning and purpose to all the rest of our lives. And, we say that, but it's hard to convince people of it until you've experienced it, I guess. So this is our job, invite and to welcome. Okay, William Holland Wilmer, my sabbatical companion. What I'm going to do, you're going to hear more about William Holland Wilmer in the next year than you care to, I'm afraid. just get used to it. I've finished a biography of him. It's off to the editor, so I want all of you to buy each a personal copy when it comes out. He's an extraordinary human being. And what I thought I would do just today, just to give you a little taste of this second rector of St. Paul's, is to just do a quick timeline, just go right through his life. So his years are 1782 to 1827. So if we go to the next slide. He was born in Chestertown, Maryland at the White House Farm, very descriptive, the White House Farm. His family came to the colonies in the late 1600s. They were English evangelicals. His grandfather established this farm. The town of Chestertown and Washington College were part of the farm, so they were connected right there. His father, William Holland Wilmer's father, was the rector of the parish there. His grandfather was one of the founders. So deeply, deeply entrenched in the Episcopal life. And it's his family that's given credit for naming the Episcopal Church in America. So after the Revolution, it wasn't really smart to be the Church of England anymore. So they had to figure out some other way, some other term. And it was his uncle that's given credit for that. So deeply Episcopal family. So he goes to Washington College and graduates in 1802. And remember, his father was one of the people that established it. It was still a fairly new college. He went in business with his brother-in-law for 3 or 4 years after college and decided that that was not what he wanted to do. He was called to be a priest. So Bishop Claggett ordained him to the diaconate and the priesthood. So the years are 1809 and 1810. Remember, Bishop Claggett is the 5th bishop of the American Church, and his distinction for him is that he's the first bishop ordained on American soil. So Seabury, Provost, White, and James Madison of Virginia all went back to England to be ordained bishops. But when they came back, they were allowed to make their first bishop. You need 3. And so Claggett was that first one. And I'll skip ahead to a story about him. So William Holland Wilmer comes, if you go back one, comes to Alexandria in 1802. And if you go to the next one, please.
The one with Old Town.
The next one.
One more.
Yeah, that's it. So he comes to Alexandria in 1802. And remember, 1812. 1809 is when the split happened with Christ Church, Gibson. It happens in October of 1809. In November, St. Paul's is established. It's over on Fairfax Street, a small clapboard board church. And Gibson is there shorter than his time at Christ Church, and then Wilmer is called. And very quickly, things start to change. The church grows exponentially, and they need a new space. And there's a great story about Bishop Claggett coming to consecrate the church and to have the first confirmation. What you can't tell from his picture is that he was 6'4", very large man, very flowing, long white hair, and so the news reports of his visit were that he looked apostolic, which I like. But here's the real kicker. He was from Maryland, and this was a day when the tensions between high church Anglo-Catholic expressions of our faith and low church, more Protestant expressions of our faith had yet come to a boil, but they were still simmering. Well, Bishop Claggett, he came with a mitre and a cope, all 6'4" of him, resplendent white hair, and then the part of the consecration service, so you imagine him walking down South Fairfax Street with his crozier, and if you've ever been to a consecration service of a church, what the bishop does is stand outside, the congregation's indoors, and since it's so rare, people have never experienced it before, so he takes his crozier and pounds on the door, boom, 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 and the door opens, and he begins with Psalm 109, I think it is, which says, "Lift up your gates, O Jerusalem, lift your heads high," and his booming voice and his resplendent apparel and his presence caused women to swoon. The Alexandria Gazette says that one young woman had to be taken out of the church. So, lots of good stories. 1814 was a huge time for William Holland Wilmer. So he comes to Alexandria. He immediately gets elected to the Virginia, to the General Convention, where after this first General Convention from the Diocese of Virginia, he becomes the president of the House of Deputies at age 34 and is president of the House of Deputies of the General Convention for 4 consecutive meetings. 34 years old. There's never been a younger president of the House of Deputies. But 1814, it's hard to, I'll go on and on at length in future conversations about how bad things were in Virginia. I'll give you just one anecdote about that, is that in colonial times there were over 250 parishes in Virginia. Remember, Virginia went all the way to the Ohio River at that point. 250, only 30 exist today. At that point, the church was so low, and after disestablishment, they fell into ruin. There are stories about baptismal fonts becoming watering troughs for animals, about the silver being used in the chalices and drinking contests, that kind of thing. Really, really low time. Most folks had given up on the Church of England, the Anglican Episcopal Church, particularly in Virginia. And William Holland Wilmer was not going to give up. So 1814, if you go back to that, this was their big moment. This is Monumental Church in Richmond. It still exists. The building is there. It's now part of the VCU Health Complex. It's right on Broad Street. So you got 95 and Broad Street. It's right in that complex there. It was a brand new church. So William Holland Wilmer was speaking at the first time the Diocesan Convention had met in 11 years. He was the president of the standing committee. Again, remember, in his early 30s. So he presided at that meeting. He preached this sermon that was the inauguration of this monumental church, and it was the call to action to rebuild Zion, to rebuild the Church of Virginia. We have that sermon. It has been published, and that really marks the beginning of a shift. An inspiration. And then there's Ted Lasso. So also at that convention, we elected the second Bishop of Virginia, whose name was Richard Channing Moore, who was an evangelical who came from New York City. And again, it was very, very, he was recruited to come here. It was very intentional. They wanted an evangelical bishop to lead the church in Virginia. So that's 1814. We go to the next slide. So if he didn't have enough to do running a parish, being the president of the House of Deputies, saving a diocese, he also wrote the Episcopal Manual, which was the very first American theology, the very first book of Anglicanism in the American church. my hope is that I'll be able to publish his book along with mine, so it's so easier for people to find. Right now it's only in archives and not available to folks to read. It's a fascinating read. And essentially what it is an unabridged version of the prayer book. So he takes the prayers, and you'll see that all of that's print underneath the Episcopal Manual. That's the subtitle. So, he packs a lot into this little book. So you'll hear more about the Episcopal Manual. And also in this year, he was the rector of St. Paul's and the founding rector of St. John's, Lafayette Square in D.C. at the same time, simultaneously. He did them both. And so again, you will know that he had his friend Benjamin Latrobe build both churches. So St. Paul's needed a new one. They needed their first one. So all that in 1815. So we get our second church. It's built in 1817, it's dedicated in 1818. It was built in the span of a single year for $26,000 in those days. Pretty amazing, huh? Good, good, good. All right, next. If he didn't have enough to do, he founded, get a load of this, you'll love the title, The Society for the Education of Pious Young Men for the Ministry of the Protestant Episcopal Church in Virginia and Maryland. He establishes this society as his first president, and he is convinced that the way to turn things around in Virginia is about formation, it's about leadership, it's about ordaining clergy to serve the church, it's about educating lay people. And so he knew that that's what he needed to do, so he founded that society, and I'll say more about that in a moment, because that's not enough. He's got more to do. He had yet another job. He was the chief editor and founder of the Virginia Theological Repertory, which was a magazine or a journal for American evangelicals. And what really set him apart also is that he, instead of sort of keeping his distance from other Christian denominations, and remember, Virginian Episcopalians were kind of sore because while we were struggling with disestablishment and getting our act back together, the Baptists and the Methodists, which had broken away from the Episcopal Church, and the Presbyterians, they were doing missionary work all over Virginia. So he'd had some catching up to do. So Wilmer had the very bright idea, said, well, instead of fighting them, let's join them. Instead of being mad, let's figure out how we can come together. And so he became very famous with this, and this is what made him famous beyond the Episcopal Church, was this journal. And he was the chief editor until he left us in 1826. So he did it all of those years. So next slide, please. Okay, this painting hangs in the rectory. I'm thankful to Dennis Brock, who was able to photograph it, and I think Cindy helped him with that. So we go to the year 1823. The Education Society makes its third attempt to start a seminary. The first was to try to rebuild the seminary at William and Mary. That failed within a year. The Bishop of Maryland decided that they would try in Maryland, and Wilmer was already hired. He was going to be the professor there. That failed. So he thought, what else are we going to do? I'll make it happen at St. Paul's, right here at St. Paul's. So I love this painting. We don't know who painted it. We don't know when it was painted, but it has all four of the historical buildings of St. Paul's in it, and that's why I love it. And we know that it was after, it's got to be in the 1900s, because notice the cross on the top and the cross over the doors, those were added much later. They're not part of Latrobe's design. So I'm not sure if people were still riding horses down Pitt Street in 1900, but there you have it.
Are they still in the basement?
This building we're in on Norton Hall used to sit back from Pitt Street, so that arch was probably right here or so. And when it came time to build a new Norton, they just took down the round part. The back of the building is still the same. They just added forward to go out to the street. The church you recognize. What you don't recognize is that the first Wilmer Hall. And why I put it in this slide right now is that William Hall and Wilmer were so convinced that education was key and that we had to start this seminary, and by golly, he was going to do it and be the first professor. He built that building himself. The vestry paid him back. So when the current Wilmer Hall was built, it was raised also, if you see right around the corner to the right, that was the first rectory. So both of those buildings were taken down for the current Wilmer Hall to be built. So, but the point being that the first classes of Virginia Seminary happened on October 23rd, 1823. So I hope we'll do lots of celebrating next year with Virginia Seminary. That first class of 14 students was probably held in the vestry, which is today our chapel, but soon after began meeting in Wilmer Hall, that lecture hall. Okay, let me just finish his story. He leaves in 1826, leaves us to be the president of William and Mary and the rector of Bruton Parish. So again, he unites his loves of parish ministry and education. He is there for a year, dies after a 2-week illness, 4 months short of his 45th birthday. Amazing. He died so young that he was eclipsed by all the other people. So no one has ever written his story, which is amazing. It's one that we should know, I think. Just an incredible human being. He was so loved, even within that 1 year time in Williamsburg. These were really rough times. So the whole community came together to give him a proper burial. He's buried in the chancel at Bruton Parish. And they had a 10-day mourning period, just like the Queen, 10 days. And folks wore black armbands. Someone quipped, one of his colleagues quipped at the time, if he had lived longer, there would only be one church in Williamsburg. Quite a guy. Okay, more to come. The next learning, in June we had roughly about 25 of us go on pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Now you may have heard the Holy Land being referred to as the fifth gospel. And what we mean by that when we talk about the fifth gospel is that the historical environment and the geographical area, this is where the Word of God was revealed, where incarnation happened, where God was made flesh in Jesus Christ. And so this is where history, geography, and salvation meet. And so the reality is that God acted in history, and the men and women of this age, of this place, starting with Abraham, going through the life of Jesus, the incarnation, the empty tomb, and resurrection. God has acted in this land. And when you go, it's true what they say. You never hear or Bible stories or read the Bible in the same way after experiencing and being in these places. But another part of the fifth gospel we don't talk about a lot, which I think is also important, is that means that we have to be attentive to the people who live there in our own day. And that is the rub for a life of Christians, Jews, and Muslims. This is God's territory. This is Holy Land. Jerusalem means the city of peace. And peace is elusive in this part of the world. It's a land of contrast. It's both hopeful and heartbreaking. Israelis pray and work for security. Palestinians want freedom and liberty. And the Anglican Christians there, small minority, are known as a bridge. It's the Anglican Church in this part of the world that focuses on education and hospitals and healthcare for everyone. And is essentially the middle bridge in a very precarious land. So part of being the fifth gospel is, I think it's incumbent upon us to keep making those visits, to go and to take different new pilgrims with us every time we go, to experience this holy land, to experience those holy people, and to be a witness, particularly to our Anglican brothers and sisters. Anytime we ever go, one of the things you always hear is, thank you for being here. We know we are remembered. You have not forgotten us. Very important. So this trip, my fourth, was amazing and different in that it was led by our good friend and friend of St. Paul's, Dr. Barbara Bain, who is the curator emerita of the Cloisters Museum of the Metropolitan in New York City. She was just incredible. Her expertise is in medieval art and architecture, so we had that bit of focus. And it's overwhelming, so what I decided to do is not sort of give you a travel log, but just give you some quick images of this journey. This, for those who have not been there or don't recognize it, is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. the site of both the crucifixion and the resurrection, all under one roof in those domes. And you know, years ago when I first went, I was the absolute skeptic about any of it. The more I go, the more I'm convinced it's the place. Incredible. All right. Part of the journey with Pilgrims is the fellow pilgrims, and that's what's really fun. It was wonderful to be with Barbara and Griffin on this pilgrimage. Something we'll always remember. That's the Dead Sea, and one of the things that we did and always do on the pilgrimage is walk the triumphal entry down the Mount of Olives, across the Kidron Valley over to the Garden of Gethsemane. So that's part of what we do. We always go to Galilee. We always go to the River Jordan to renew our baptismal promises. So you might recognize some of these faces right here in the room. And those of you who are fellow travelers, if you'll be ready to, if we have time, we'll call on you and get a sense of your experience as well. All right, next slide. And part of the journey is not only going with pilgrims you know, but being reunited with old friends. That's Archbishop Suhail Gilani, who was a recently retired Archbishop of the Middle East, so Jerusalem, Egypt, Cyprus, Jordan, and his lovely wife. Suhail was my classmate of ETS, class of '88, and we lived on the dorm together. I was in my early 20s at that point in time, and I haven't really thought about it. I didn't think about it then, but the more I think about it now, it's just incredible about the sacrifices this man made. He came here, married with 2 children, and lived for the first 2 years and never not seeing them. And in those days, it wasn't even really easy to communicate. But for the 3rd year, they came and lived in Alexandria. Just an incredible human being. There some of us are in the old city on a scavenger hunt, which was quite fun. I included this one. Dorothy's not here today, but Dorothy is a repeat pilgrim, and so we have a picture from several years ago at the Lazarus tomb, so we had to get a new one. And she and I both are somewhat claustrophobic, so we sort of encourage each other to go down into the tomb, which we did. We made it.
Look at Griffin. That's a great shot.
Isn't that a great shot? Dead Sea is so full of minerals that you're buoyant. You don't even have to swim. Pretty amazing, huh? And they all have great skin after being in This is a wonderful memory of the journey. That's Father Samuel, who was the head of the Armenian Church in the Holy Sepulchre, and a great friend of Dr. Bain, which got us entree in a place where pilgrims don't go. So you go in the Holy Sepulchre, you go down to this Armenian church, way below the street level, and then what we don't see is to the left there's an iron gated door that he unlocks and takes us down even further, where you can see 2 really incredible things. You can see the 1st century quarry, which Golgotha was a quarry, and you can see that famous pilgrim drawing of the ship with the cross on it that has in Latin, Lord, we have come. And it's from the 300s. Pilgrims have been coming there probably since the 1st century, but that's like the first most ancient graffiti is there in that lower part of the Holy Sepulchre. So really an amazing day for us there. You've got to have food on the journey. These are some of my favorites. I had hummus for every meal while I was there. That's a baker in the old city. And Middle Easterners, like me, have a sweet tooth. So you're never very far from something sweet, which is really wonderful. The old city is just incredible. Those of you who've been there know the sense. I thought I'd include a picture of when things are closed. And various quarters are closed depending on the different Sabbaths. But when things are open and doors are open, it's just full of life and people and a crush of people most all the time. Lovely at night, see the ramparts and the moon. I thought it would be interesting for you to see at 1st century synagogues. When you get in your head, when Jesus is teaching in a synagogue, we sort of think of church. But really, it's more of the Wilmer Hall sort of lecture room. So a small space where people would sit, along the edge, and a teacher, a rabbi, would read from scrolls and instruct. So.
Just give it a second.
Next week, I'll talk about Ted Lasso. Okay, how are we doing?
We have 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. Mosaics. going with Barbara Bain, we saw a lot of mosaics and a lot of capitals. So that's something that we'll never look at another mosaic and capital again after the same way. I just want to call attention to remember that not everything has been discovered. Things are being discovered all the time. And this is Sepphoris here on the right. That's the Madonna of Sepphoris, which is a fairly new discovery. Next one. This is Hisham's Palace. And Barbara Bain and our guide from St. George's, they were there the last time. There was 10 square feet of mosaic unearthed. By the time we went back, there were thousands of square feet. This isn't even the palace. This is the bathhouse of the palace. Hot and cold baths, an indoor swimming pool. Pretty amazing, huh? Architecture and columns, lots of beautiful columns. We spent a lot of time in Nazareth looking at this set of, these are Crusader columns. Beautiful. Doors, amazing doors. That's the door to the Holy Sepulchre, and for someone, again, claustrophobic, I'm always aware that there's one door in and one out, and how do you get to that door? It's an ancient door. There's a Muslim family that holds the keys to the Holy Sepulchre. Unlock it and lock it every day, and they've done it for 400 years. Wow. Pretty amazing. And they can keep the peace. The Christians can't get along with the Muslims got the key to the door. And then this is Nazareth. I just love it because it sort of tells the story of Jesus, the birth, flight to Egypt, instruction. It goes through the story just in a beautiful way to tell that story. Inside the Holy Sepulchre, that's the Episcopal, that was the cave that has been carved out and made very ornate. But that's where you can go into the Tomb of Resurrection and the dome. That's the big dome that you see from the outside. Saw the Dead Sea Scrolls at the Israeli Museum. I thought it'd be interesting for you to see how they're displayed, which is great. So this is that's lit from the back, a very dark room. If you go to the next one, so you see it, they're lit like they're a scroll, and then from the outside, it's the shape of the clay pot in which they were found. I thought it was very interesting.
They're still finding
beautiful.
them too, as though Dr.
Okay. And then outside the museum is this model of first century Jerusalem. And I like it because you get the sense of the immensity of the temple. Even today, in its smaller version, it's just incredible. The western wall is just a small fraction of what remains of the temple. But it was the largest, most magnificent building in the world at the time of Jesus. And you just go over the top of the Mount of Olives from Bethany, and it fills the whole landscape. And Jesus would have gone, if you go back, his entrance into Jerusalem would come from the south, from the city of David through the Kidron Valley up through here. And another thing that you get the sense of when you go is how close things are. So Jesus would have his agony at the Garden of Gethsemane and could see the temple, so that close. The Dome of the Rock, and again, because of the great respect of the St. George's College and Dr. Bain, we were able to enter. Christians don't get to enter the Dome of the Rock, but we got to go in, and there's some pictures here, and the Alaska Moth. So there was great joy and celebration for us to be able to see these beautiful spaces, but also tinged with great sadness. There's the week before we were there, maybe a little further before, violence. Some of the glass was shattered there. People were held up in the Alaska Moths in the tension between this very sacred space. There's a little humor every now and again. Herod was a deplorable human being, but he knew how to build himself wonderful palaces, hilltop palaces. And I don't know if you can see but these are the original Rolling Stones. That's where they got the name. That was part of the defense of at that palace. Crusader crosses, again, pilgrims coming through to the Holy Sepulchre. You can see those on the walls as you enter down in. Get to the Sea of Galilee, which for many folks it's their favorite because you don't have to use your imagination much to sort of see Jesus there with the disciples. It's much more as it was in those days, I think. So you see still boats out there, beautiful lake. It is it's a lake, not a sea, really. So time for solitude, and it was very warm there. That's Chris Fulgham cooling off. And this Capernaum is right on the Sea of Galilee, and I love this photograph because there is a 4th century synagogue on top but it's built on the first century one. So Jesus was in that synagogue teaching. And then, of course, the wall. So part of art and architecture was to look at modern art as well. So that is, depends on who you ask what you call that. That's either the separation wall or the security wall. The Banksy, famous artist, did the angels there and does keep coming back to add to the, and while we were there, it was soon after the journalist was killed, Sahira, and her portrait is going to be put on the wall as well. And then I thought I would conclude with this picture of St. George's College, which is really an oasis in East Jerusalem for pilgrims, a place that is at the crossroads and very dedicated to the work of keeping pilgrimage alive. And so I hope that if you're intrigued by this and interested, we try to, every several years, take groups over so that you can experience this as well. Many of the clergy who have served this part of the world and currently serve this diocese are educated at Virginia Seminary, so they know Alexandria, know us, and have lots of connections. I'll stop there, and I guess I